shifting pattern looks like in all the different types of trucks or different transmission types. I'm just going to kind of go through the whole spiel here. So we're in first, second, third. Now we're in four. So now to go into our high range gears, we'll flip up on our splitter. Now we're in five low. And then we'll flip our little red. Now we're in 5 high. And 6 low. 6 high. We'll reselect. 7 low. Reselect again. 7 high. And then get ready to go into our last gear. So we'll pre-select. Get up to 1600. Now we're at 8 low. Pre-select one last time. And then now 1600. Now we're good. And then I'll turn my cruise on. And now we're done. So like I showed earlier, you got this great lever here on the front of your stick, and that's your selector for your high and your low range. And then this red selector on the side that you move with your thumb will give you your splits for your each individual gear. So like I said, in your 18 speeds, you're able to split your low range and your high range gear. That you move with your thumb will give you your splits for your each individual gear. So like I said, in your 18 speeds, you're able to split your low range and your high range gears versus like your 10 or your 15 speed, or not your 10 speeds, your 13 or your 15 speeds, you're only able to split your high range gears. And then your high range gears versus like your 10 or your 15 speed, or not your 10 speeds, your 13 or your 15 speeds, you're only able to split your high range gears. And then it's kind of the same deal with your reverse. In your 15s and your 18 speeds, you have 3 different reverse gears versus a 13 speed like this. I've only got 2, so I've got a low and a high. So if I wanted to go reverse in a high range, I would flip this up while I'm in neutral and then put it in reverse, and then I would have a high range reverse, and I could probably do about probably like 8 or 10 miles an hour in reverse. It's probably about the same for a 15 or an 18 speed if you put it in basically high reverse. You have this, select your splitter up and your gear splitter up on this side, push all the way forward. You probably get about the same speed in reverse if you needed to. Not quite sure why you would need that many reverse gears, unless maybe you're doing a lot of backing up long roads or construction sites or something like that, where it might come in handy to just kind of make your process a little bit faster. Or if you're maybe like a dump truck or a straight truck type situation, like a milk truck, like my dad used to do, where you're having to back up long driveways, winding driveways. It might be handy to have that extra gear or two in reverse, so then you can make that process go a little bit quicker versus just trying to chug along at like 4 or 5 miles an hour backing up the driveway. Or like I said, the dump truck situation, on these road construction sites, or on even a regular construction site, you might have to back up, 1,000 yards or so, and doing it at 5 miles an hour is going to take quite a long time. But if you're not waiting on anybody, you can throw it into your reverse gear and get back there half the time. And gears. I'll double check that because I don't have the splitter or the gear layout in front of me, but I do believe 18 speeds have 2 low gears, and 15 speeds might also have 2 low gears. I'm not sure about the 15s. I'm pretty sure 18s do. But like mine, I have a 13 speed. I only have the 1 low gear, so that's, you almost think of it as like half a gear. Like instead of having first gear, you have 0.5. Gives you a little bit extra pull power, which is really good for if you're on a really steep incline. Like in a dock situation, sometimes you have docks that they have a really steep hill, and it might be a little bit hard to smooth the transition from stop or on that hill to get in first gear. Slowly let up the clutch and pull out of there. So if you put it in low, you're only going to be able to do like 2 or 3 miles an hour, but you can almost completely dump the clutch on it, and your truck will just gently pull right out of that slope. And then you can just shift up your gears from there. So it makes that process go pretty smooth for a situation like that. Or if you're having like a tow truck situation, or if you're needing to help pull somebody out, you can put your truck in low, and it gives you that extra torque to really put the power down on your tires in a more controlled fashion than if you were to have it in first gear or second gear. Because most of these trucks, like right now I've got an empty trailer that I'm really light, so I can start, if I really want to, in third gear from a dead stop and have really no problems. But even with a full load on it, I've started in second gear before from a full stop, 70,000 to 80,000 pound load, and I just, set it in second gear and slowly let off the clutch, and the truck's got enough horsepower and torque to get me rolling with no problems. And like I've said in the past, the truck transmission and shifting type and the way you work the clutch is similar to a car, but not the exact same. So in cars and pickups, you kind of have to feather the clutch and the gas to get going. Because you can't most vehicles don't have enough torque to where if you just slowly let up the clutch, they won't start rolling. Versus a truck that's got so much torque, in a semi, that you can just let off the clutch and it's got enough torque to just get you rolling. You don't need to give it a little bit of extra gas, you don't stall the engine. And that's why you can start, you don't have to start in your lowest gear every time if you don't want to. And then the other thing too is you can float your gears in cars and pickups. It's probably not as easy as it is in semis because they have extra mechanisms in the transmission to make gear shifting a lot smoother in cars and a lot faster. And the fact that you're also shifting at 2 to 3 times the RPM you are in a semi, so you need to have those extra gear mechanisms in there to make sure that you're not smashing gears together or breaking anything inside the transmission. But it is possible. I've seen videos of guys doing it. It's not the hardest thing to do in the world, but it's probably not recommended. It's probably just as easy to hit the clutch and shift in a car than it would be to try to float. Versus in a semi, once you do it long enough in the same truck or a similar truck, you get pretty good at knowing what RPMs need to be at in order to shift from one gear to the next, going up or going down. And in my case, I hardly ever use the clutch when I'm shifting. The only time I do it is sometimes if I'm going slow, the gears are kind of stuck together, so I just tap the clutch just lightly to get it out. But for the most part, I never ever use the clutch unless I'm stopping or starting. And it's just one of those things where you can do it. There's a few different techniques for doing it. So there's, I guess, the recommended technique is double clutching. So that's where you press your clutch down about halfway, get into neutral. So you'll hit the clutch at the same time you're letting off the gas. Put your stick into neutral, and then put it back in the gear. And that's what we call double clutching. People do that in cars too. It helps kind of smooth the transition from gear to gear. But you can do it the other way. You can also just kind of do it the easier way, or the simpler way is just to press the clutch and then move from one gear to the next. It's probably not as recommended because you are wearing out the clutch brake and all the mechanisms inside that clutch system. But it's something you can do if you're not quite coordinated enough to tap the clutch, move the stick, tap the clutch again, while at the same time feathering your throttle. And you're definitely not, you don't have the skill or you haven't developed the timing right to just float through your gears. But it's all one of those things where you just kind of learn it as you drive. So the more driving you do, the better you'll get at kind of knowing the sound of the engine, what the sound of the engine needs to be for when you shift and the timing, because it all can vary on, if you're going up the hill, you might want to have to shift a little bit faster than you would normally if you're on level ground. And it's all about knowing your vehicle that you're in and knowing your transmission that you're running. And if you're running an 8-speed, just a regular 8-speed or a 9-speed transmission, your shift points will be a lot different than what mine are, or somebody who else is driving like a 15 or an 18-speed. Because we can, people in our situation where we got those split higher gears, our shift points, we only have to drop the RPMs about 200 RPMs to move from one gear to the next, versus in a 9-speed or a 10-speed. In order to go from one gear to the next, you might have to drop 300 to 400 RPMs. So your max RPM when you shift might be the same, but when they drop down, you'll be looking at, like if I'm shifting at 1600 RPMs in my truck, I'll be going into the next gear at about 1400, versus if you're in a 9 or 10 speed, you're shifting out at 1600, you're dropping back in at 13 or 1200 RPMs. So it all depends on the transmission in your truck. Each truck's a little bit different. So like my boss, he drives a Kenworth T2000, and it's got a 13 speed as well, but his transmission shifts a little bit different. His is off by about 50 RPM from mine on where it likes to shift. And it's the same transmission, same engine, or similar engine, I should say. Similar, I think almost the exact same gear ratios for the rear ends and everything like that. So it's all roughly the same for the most part. But for some reason, the transmission just wants to shift in a little bit different spot. And it's just one of those things where you got to learn or just get comfortable with your vehicle to kind of figure that out and get better and smoother at it, to where you're almost never grinding gears or rubbing anything. You shouldn't have to. And even with the clutch, if you're double clutching or single clutching, whatever you're doing, you can still grind your gears. It's not a foolproof method of getting away from grinding gears, because at the end of the day, you still got a rev match. So you got to feather your throttle when you're shifting to make sure you're getting those RPMs in the right spot, along to match your speed that you're going for the gear that you want to be in. And it's also the same thing if you got like a twin stick or a triple stick. It's really no different than what this is. It's just you got, instead of one shifter with all your controls on it, you're now dealing with two. So if I was going from 4 to 5, as I'm going into neutral with my main gearbox and getting ready to, go into 5, if I had a twin stick, I would put it into neutral with my main stick, drop in my auxiliary gearbox, and then go back to my main gearbox. So it just becomes even more complicated of a process. It's almost like trying to drive or double clutch, and it's just another skill that you have to learn and get used to. And some guys do it, that are over the road guys, or some guys back in the day they used to do it for city hauling, where you have twin sticks, and some guys would do it with two hands. So they would basically put their knee on the wheel, and as they're shifting, they would use both hands to manipulate the two sticks. And you can do that if you really feel comfortable with it, but it's probably not the safest thing to do if you're on the highways. what I'll do is I'll slow down and drop it into 8 low. So I'll slow down to probably about 62-ish in here, and then I'll pre-select my low range, let up the throttle, put it back on, it'll drop down to 8 low, and then from there, when I'm decelerating, I'll just drop down to about 1,000 RPMs, kind of gently tap the throttle up, at the same time I'm pushing on the stick, it'll pop out of gear, and then I'll rev up to about 14 to 1,500 RPMs, whatever I need to be at, and just gently push on the stick as I'm trying to get into that next lower gear, and it should slide right in, and then it's the same thing all the way down. And then if I'm stopping, I'll usually go into 4 as I'm getting close to stop, and then once I get down to about 1,000 RPMs in 4, then I'll pop it out, go to neutral, close to a stop, and then I'll put it back into gear. And it's the same process for getting off the highways or slow down for the curves. I just go into low range up here, so that way I can go straight from high range to low range without having to do an extra shift at the bottom. And just because I'm 13 speed, if I had an 18 speed, I could leave it in high range and go all the way down and not have to worry about it. And yeah, I'll try and remember to put the camera on so you guys can see kind of what that looks like in here, what the engine sounds like as I'm shifting, because when I'm downshifting, I'm not trying to hit, 8 low, 7 high, 7 low, 6 high, 6 low. I'm not doing all of that mess because it's not really necessary. And if for some reason I downshift, let's say I downshift, get all the way down to 6 low, and then I need to speed back up, well, it's as simple as just hitting getting on the gas again, and then going back into 6 high, and then upshifting if I have to, or if I have to slow back down, I just, hit the brake, and then go back into 6 low, and then downshift, continue downshifting. So it's, as long as you're in whatever gear you're comfortable with, moving down it. If you wanted to stay in high all the way down to 5, and then drop from 5, 5 high to 5 low, and then downshift into lower range, that's fine. It's whatever you like to do, or whatever you're comfortable with doing. But for me, I just like to go low range from the start, work my way all the way down, so that way once I get to 5 low, all I have to do is hit my high and low range selector switch on the front to get down into the lower range, and then I'm done. I don't have to worry about hitting my splitter on the side here. So that's all I got for this chunk. Like I said, I'll try to remember to put the camera on for when I'm downshifting and out here, so try to do some highways here in a little bit. Alright, so we're coming up on our little interchange here. We're going to go from 94 to 494, 694, so it's one of those cloverleafs. And as I get up closer to the interchange, the highway speed drops down, so I'll downshift into the 8 low. That's just as simple as pre-selecting down, and then once I get a little bit closer, I'll let out the gas, and then start it back up, and then downshift if I'm in low range, and then from there it's just as simple as downshifting once I get closer to the actual cloverleaf. And one thing you got to remember when you've already pre-selected, you've got to remember that if you don't want to downshift right away, you can't fully let off the throttle, otherwise it'll automatically downshift or put you in that neutral range. And then if you go to re-accelerate, all of a sudden now your RPM will jump up 200 or more than what you were normally at. That's something you want to keep in mind in case for some reason you pre-selected, then the traffic picks back up. Like I said, I'm empty, so I don't need to really brake all too hard or get on the engine brake today. And we'll just slow down. We're at about 1050 for RPM, and we jumped up to about 1300. And we'll just keep doing this. We'll go down probably one more. That'll be good for it. usually if I'm loaded, I'll go down one more, and I'll jump up to 5 high. That way I have a little bit more torque, because with these trucks you get a little bit more torque at the higher RPMs. So if I'm loaded, I'm going to want that extra torque as I'm climbing up and re-accelerating back onto the highway. Then it's just a matter of going back to your gear progression up. And then I'm actually going to skip state low, so I'm just going to accelerate up to 1600. Might have heard it kind of grinding a little bit. It's not the end of the world. The big thing with if you're not quite at the right RPMs when you're shifting is to don't force it, just gentle pressure, no more pressure than you would use to kind of squeeze the buttons on your phone, I guess is a good reference point. You don't need a lot of pressure to shift between gears. I usually just use these two middle fingers, my middle finger and my ring finger on my right hand, and just put on the front edge of the stick here, or if I'm on the back side, I just use my palm, open palm, and just light pressure forward. And that's all you really need to go from gear to gear. And if you hear it grinding like that, like a real light grind, just kind of listen to what it's doing, and if it's slowing down, if the grinding is slowing down, that means you're probably getting closer to matching the speeds, versus if it's speeding up, or if the sound is changing really fast, it means you're way off your RPMs, and that's where you'll want to feather your throttle with your right foot and get it so that that grinding, that rubbing sound is very slow. That means your gears are about to mesh. And then once you get it close, then you can put a little bit more pressure on than we normally would. And then once you're right there, it'll grab that gear and it'll pull it right in. And I always like to make sure that I'm in. So once I get into gear, I'll give it a little extra push or a pull and make sure it's seated. Because sometimes you can almost only be like halfway into your gear. And if you hit a bump or you accidentally bump the shifter, if you're moving your arm around in the cab, you can knock yourself out of gear. And if you're accelerating, let's say you're accelerating uphill and you get a bump as you're going up, you know, just the jostling in the truck with the shifter kind of bouncing around like this one does could be enough to pop it out of gear. And you'll want to make sure that you're kind of seated all the way into gear, especially when you're loaded, because that big change, you know, with all that torque, we only put on half those gear teeth. That's when you run the risk of shearing gear teeth and breaking something inside your transmission, or just even cracking one or two of those teeth and causing that stress, which may not be a problem now, but in the future, if that happens, if you keep doing it more and more and more, you run the risk of one day you're accelerating or you're decelerating, and you put it in gear, and you go to put some throttle in it, all of a sudden you get this big bang or bang, and all of a sudden now you don't have a third gear, or you know, your transmission just completely explodes and you have nothing. So it's always important to make sure that when you put it into gear, that you're always into gear. And if you're not sure, one thing that I do is if I'm not sure that I've made it all the way into gear, is I'll put it into gear, and if I'm not sure, I'll just let off the accelerator a little bit and then pull on the shifter, because that'll make sure you're fully seated and be no different than if you're shifting from gear to gear, because you'll accelerate, and then as you're letting off, that's when you're pushing on the shifter to pull out from one gear to go into the next. And you can do the same process, but instead of trying to push it out of gear, you just pull it more into gear in essence, and that'll make sure that you're fully seated in that gear that you're in, that you want to be in. The only time you don't have to worry about that is your auxiliary transmission. There's no way to miss those gears, because it's an air cylinder that pushes that gear in and out. So you don't have to worry about that not being all the way in. Or if it isn't all the way in, there's nothing you can do about it. just because you don't have control of it. It's just these levers and these switches on your stick here control that cylinder. So if that were the case, you could maybe recycle it. So, you know, in my case, if I'm in high range and I don't think it's in all the way, I can go back to low range and flick it back into high and basically move that gear in and out again. But that's basically all your options are for that, because you don't have another stick to control that. Versus if you had a twin stick, then you could tell if you are fully in gear or not, and that would be the time where you'd want to do the same thing you would with your main transmission box. You know, let out the accelerator and just kind of grab that stick, give it a good yank, and make sure it's fully seated in whatever gear you want it to be in. That's all I got for downshifting and shifting in general. And I should cover anything. If you guys have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments. I can answer them, or I can at least point you in the direction to find an answer for them. Shifting's not that complicated of a process. It's just a skill set that you got to learn with driving a truck. It's no different than backing up or turning in tight alleyways or tight street corners. It's all about kind of knowing your truck and how it reacts when you do things. So yeah, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. We got more videos coming out. I'm going to start doing these every Thursday. And yeah, that's all I got for you guys. So peace out.